Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. There's certainly been a lot of drops from the Marvel Legends line from Hasbro recently, and it's quite difficult to keep up. But this week I'm going to have a stab at taking a look at the Guardians of the Galaxy Ronan the Accuser Deluxe figure. Now I should point out that this isn't the first time we've had a Ronan in the Marvel Legends line. We've had one other from Hasbro a good long while ago, which was actually a Build-A-Figure. He was slightly oversized and it was based on his appearance from the Annihilation series. So much more of a modern interpretation of his costume. I always wanted this guy, but sadly I was never able to assemble him myself. So I've long wished and hoped for a re-release or an alternate version of Ronan, and finally my prayers have been answered because yes, Marvel Legends have finally produced a classic Ronan the Accuser, which is actually my preference because I think this costume is just a lot more striking and a lot more visually arresting. Thankfully, this time around, Ronan is not a Build-A-Figure. He is a single deluxe action figure that you can buy all on his own. This is definitely my preference. It's a lot easier on the wallet, and it means you don't have to buy lots of extra additional figures that you perhaps don't need or want. So if we start off by taking a look at the packaging, of course it is plastic free, so we do have this rather interesting image at the front of the packaging here where we have this digital rendering of the action figure himself. Behind him there is that collage effect. We actually have this rather wonderful image taken from the comic books directly, which is blued out, which looks pretty striking, and then we have the Guardians of the Galaxy logo at the bottom of the packaging there. For the most part, this is pretty presentable, but it's just not the most exciting packaging or branding in the world, but it still does the job. You can put this on display and it looks pretty nice. If we look at the side panels, we can see on one side we have this image, the digital rendering of the action figure, and if we flip it and look at the reverse, we see this fantastic image taken directly from the comics of Ronan in action there. So again, this is pretty consistent with the other recent releases in this line, and you can display them however you want. And then if we flip the packaging over, we have a little bit more colour added here. We see some purples amongst the blue as well, which is quite nice. Of course, we have another digital rendering here of Ronan, the figure himself, looking pretty cool in action pose there, holding his big staff, which looks great. Behind him we have the collage effect, although this seems to be pretty random. It doesn't seem to be specific to Ronan, but I can see images of Venom and Doctor Doom in here, and this looks pretty nice for the most part. Again, it's pretty displayable. It's not the most exciting in the world, but it certainly does the job. Once again, the outer card is actually a pretty flimsy card, but inside is a more robust, thick card inset which actually houses the figure inside, and the figure itself is contained within this rice paper. I'm not a huge fan of this approach. It definitely keeps the figure secure when he's fresh in packaging, but once you take him out and put him back into packaging if you so wish, then it's a little bit fiddly and faffy, and it just feels a little bit loose, especially when we look at accessories that just come in separate baggies. Now the first thing I'll say about this figure is that he is visually very eye-catching. I love the various shades of green that have been produced by using various different plastics to create this rich texture of greens, which is really effective. And in terms of accuracy and likeness to his appearance in the comic books for this classic design, I think they've pretty much hit the nail on the head. Obviously there's been different interpretations of this costume from different artists across the years, but this seems to be pretty close to what is regarded as Ronan's de facto costume. And this looks really good. I think they've done a really nice job with the sculpt. He's definitely got that sort of scowling head, which looks great. His proportions look to be pretty accurate, and I think his overall sizing looks great. I particularly like the use of the metallic green plastic that they've used around the neck and on the arms, the belt, and of course his legs. This is very eye-catching and it catches the light beautifully as well, so it definitely gives a really interesting texture there. Likewise, it's very pleasing to see the individual markings actually sculpted and etched into the costume, giving it a lot more depth and texture, which is fantastic. In a similar vein, it's also really nice to see they've used a number of different materials. The shoulder pads, for example, the belt and the skirt are all made of a different plastic. It's more of a soft, rubbery plastic versus the harder plastic of the actual joints of the figure itself. So this is really good, definitely gives it a lot more depth and texture, and I think looks very effective. Where I'd be critical though, and you probably know what I'm going to say before I say it, is that once again we're seeing a real lack when it comes to paint washes or any shading whatsoever. There's a lot of detail here in the sculpt that just isn't being picked up on by the paint, and it's a real shame because we're actually losing a lot of that attention to detail. So let's take a look at the articulation. He does have a ball joint in the top of his head, but unfortunately it is a struggle to get him to turn it from side to side. That's due to the head cloth and the shoulder pads, and yeah, the result is he can't really tilt it left or right, and he can't move it forwards and backwards. He's got ball joints in his shoulders. As you can see, that shoulder pad will dislocate to allow extra movement, but it's a bit clunky and a bit awkward, and you kind of have to pop it back into place, and it's not It's not the best thought out, this one, I've got to be honest. It's not really particularly user-friendly and it looks a bit of an eyesore. There is a complementary bicep swivel and there is a single joint at the elbow, allowing that lower forearm to bend to about 90 degrees. Now there is a pin swivel at the wrist, allowing that hand to rotate all the way around, and it will just about do it despite having a chunky bit of overlap on the top of the gauntlet there. And it will also hinge forwards and backwards, but not a great deal. There is a straight swivel at the waist which will allow him to move from side to side, but sadly there's no ball joint here so he can't lean left and right. He does have an ab crunch though, as you can see in the centre of his chest there, so that will allow him to bend forwards and backwards a pretty good distance, at least forwards, not so much backwards. There's ball joints in the hips, so the legs will kick out to the side. There's a complementary upper thigh swivel as well. There's also a swivel at the bottom of the boot cut. The legs will kick forwards, they'll kick backwards. There's a double joint at the knee. And then finally there is an ankle pivot there as well, a ball joint there allowing the foot to hinge forwards and backwards and swivel from side to side. Sadly, he is very light when it comes to accessories. All he comes with is his giant staff hammer thing. And for the most part this looks really good. It's nicely sculpted, there's some nice paint, particularly on the head of the hammer. There's no real paint or shading on the staff itself, which is a shame. But this is a really nice piece, it's a nice good size as well, it looks properly in proportion with him, and I think this works very, very well. But I'm really disappointed that we didn't get alternate hands, that we didn't get an alternate head, nothing extra whatsoever. For a deluxe figure at this price tag, I would expect a little something extra. But the staff itself is pretty cool, as I've said, and he has no issues gripping this in either or both hands. It's a nice tight grip, and it's just as well because he only gets that one pair of hands to grip it with. But this seems to work either way, and it looks really, really good and very effective. So this is a nice accessory to have. As a quick scale comparison, here he is standing next to the Human Torch, which was released a couple of years ago. As you can see, he's obviously massively oversized, he is much taller and broader than your standard 6-inch Marvel Legends figure. So he's definitely deluxe and he's definitely oversized, and this works really nice. I think the scaling is approximately what I'd expect for these two characters. Here he is standing next to the Thing, so he's roughly on a par in terms of scale with the Thing, although just slightly taller than him. Now, from my memory in the comic books, I've always tend to feel that Ronan is even slightly taller again than the Thing, so I'm not sure how accurate this is, but of course, so much of this is open to artistic license, but this is roughly in scale. And then here he is standing next to the Grey Hulk. This is, of course, from Toy Biz's early run on the series, and yeah, obviously this Hulk definitely looks bigger and taller than Ronan, but again, I think this is probably approximately correct. So then, final thoughts from me. I'm going to give this figure 2 stars. And that probably seems really, really low, and I suppose it is. Let me qualify this a little bit. As I've said, I really, really was looking forward to getting my hands on this figure, probably more than any other character this year, just because he's such a rare one. We haven't had this character produced for a very long time, and it's one I've never had in my collection, and I really like this character. So expectations were high, which is always a dangerous thing, I suppose, when it comes to actually getting the figure in hand. Now, initially, I was super impressed because I thought he looked fantastic, and I do still think he looks really good. I have to commend Hasbro for the use of plastics, particularly that metallic sort of green they've used on his arms and on his neck piece there. I think this is really eye-catching. I think the overall look is really page accurate. I think they definitely captured the look of Ronan as I think of it in my mind, so I think they've done a nice job there, and his overall proportions are pretty accurate, and I do really like that he comes with that fantastic hammer staff. I think, again, they've done a really nice job of that. So that's all the good stuff. But I just feel like there's so much riding against this figure. First and foremost, the articulation. Whilst the scheme itself is not bad by any stretch of the imagination, its actual functionality is very, very limited. And that's because of those big, chunky shoulder pads which feel clunky and cheap and a bit plastic-like. The fact that he can't really move his head because, again, the cowl that goes over the top of his head there. The hands on the gauntlets are also a bit limited because of the plastic gauntlets that go over the top of them. And, the joints that we do have tend to be single joints, particularly in the elbows there, which limit articulation and posability. And overall, I've just generally struggled to get this figure into any really interesting poses, just because he's so limited, really, and there's just not many options available to me. The other major issue is the fact that, yeah, we get no extra accessories whatsoever, and I've already made the point earlier in the video, but at this price point I would expect at least additional hands, a closed fist, an alternate head would be really cool, maybe an open mouth yelling head or something, just to create some different looks with this character, maybe a head without the cowl. I don't know, there's different things that perhaps they could have done that they didn't here, which is really disappointing. And then then finally, I'm just really disappointed that we're seeing this continuing trend in Marvel Legends as of late, where they just simply don't employ more paint apps. They're just not adding a lot of shading, they're not adding many washes over their sculpts, and we're losing such a lot through that, because the sculpts themselves are absolutely fantastic, but they're taking a real bare bones approach to the actual paint apps. And we're seeing this not just with Hasbro and Marvel Legends, we're seeing it across the board, but this is something that is a bit of a disconcerting trend, and it makes figures feel a lot cheaper in the long run. And it's a bit disappointing for collectors, especially a series like this, which has had a long history of doing just that. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.